So, Nate, I'm excited about today's episode. Over the last 6 months, we've done a number of episodes that are going to be like today's. We did the date night episode. We did the 21-day hiring test episode. We did the marketing one sheet episode. An episode where we went in great detail, or a moderate amount of detail, about a very specific topic, about something very specific that you and I have found to be useful for the various businesses we run. Because you've got Big Music Games, I've got grouplessons.com, you've got BMF, I've got Group, I've got Grow, and there's just all these pies we have our fingers in. And over the years, we've kind of collected these techniques or tools or those sorts of things. And I'm excited about today's because I've had so many people ask us about this because you've casually dropped references to this topic throughout the last 130 something episodes. So today's episode is about having an employee handbook. And again, I'm in a position where there's really no one else on the planet I'd really like to talk to about this other than you, because I've been to BMF a lot. I've seen how well things are run there. And let's just dive into it.
Yeah. What is an employee handbook, right? That's the fundamental question. And I'll just open by saying this is one of the least sexier topics, right? Like an employee handbook is not something that most people get into business wanting to create, right? They're not like, I'm going to start a music academy because I want to have the best employee handbook ever. Right. And yet it's essential at a certain point in the growth of your school. So I'm going to actually read you what is an employee handbook. I'm going to read you from the intro of our employee handbook. It's just two short paragraphs. It says, we believe clear expectations, consistent communication, and regular feedback are the keys to each of us growing and succeeding as individuals and for the Brooklyn Music Factory as a whole. This employee handbook contains information on the policies, the benefits, and the mutual expectations you will need to understand as a member of the BMF community. So, in short, that's exactly what an employee handbook does. It lays out the policies, the benefits, and the mutual expectations for everybody who's working at your school. So, I want to highlight the first little, it's not even a paragraph, it's a sentence, dude. It says, we believe clear expectations, consistent communication, and regular feedback are the keys to each of us growing and succeeding as individuals at the factory or at BMF as a whole. Clear expectations, consistent communication, and regular feedback. I'm going to ping it back to you, but I'm going to highlight that second thing first, which is consistent communication. If your employee handbook does nothing else for your school, it is a consistent communication tool. It's the thing that you can keep pointing back to whenever a teacher says, well, I didn't know that I wasn't allowed to take time off during gig season or recital season. Or an admin person says, I didn't know I was supposed to give 2 weeks notice for paid time off, or whatever. It's just consistent communication tool. And I think so often we hear from the school owners that we work with, Daniel, around this idea of like, why was I surprised yet again by something that one of my teachers or employees or staff did? Well, oftentimes we're surprised because we haven't actually just put pen to paper, like inked the thing and said, I'm going to point back to this every time you have a question. It may not be the best, smartest policy ever, but it's what we got to work with. So that's what we're all going to agree is the policy.
Well, once again, it's only taken us 3 to 4 minutes to get back to what is an underlying subtext of this podcast, which is write things down and just think ahead. Like, here we are again, Nate. Here we are again.
Yeah.
Which is so funny because, again, and I think I said this in the last episode too, we're 130 episodes in now. We have this great guide of all the episodes, all these categories of topics that we've covered. And it's very rare nowadays that I don't get on a consultation call with someone who, needs help with their school it's very rare that I get on a call like that and the person doesn't say, "Hey, I love your podcast," or "I found you because of the podcast," or something like that, right?
Right.
And a lot of people say things to the effect of, "Oh, I've listened to most of the episodes. I found a few, and then I just started at the beginning, and I've listened all the way through." And then, having introduced ourselves to each other, we get into what their actual problems are. And then they proceed to tell me over the next 45 minutes to an hour all the things that they're not doing that we literally been recommending on this podcast from day one. And this isn't to blame and shame. This isn't like, to wag my finger or be, judgmental or that sort of thing. It's just that it's funny to me how in business, some of the things that are most fundamental are actually very, very simple. Write things down, think ahead, like I said a few minutes ago. And so I just had to highlight. And I do want to highlight right before I kick it back over to you, because I want to ask another question. Just that I think the missing link a lot of times for people is the enormity of everything that has to be done, and a consistent line or a consistent thing I've heard on a lot of these calls, because I do hundreds and hundreds of them every year, is just, what's the order I do it in? Where can I get the most leverage right now? How do I build that? It's the difference between knowing the information and knowing that you're supposed to be doing it and actually being able to implement it, which of course is why we're doing the Founders Forum later this year, to give people an extra measure of support beyond just the kind of surface level that we deal with it on the podcast. So we're actually helping people build and implement things, and even giving them like a lot of inside stuff from both of our businesses. So I won't say more about that, but let me kick it back over to you by asking, just what is the purpose that you have an employee handbook for at BMF? Like, I know you just read that there, but deeper than that, like what? I'm just going to let you interpret the question however you want. Go for it.
Yeah. Like, when does one know they need an employee handbook? Because back to your comment about the forum that we're doing, which is a collection of, just like highly motivated school owners that want to grow their school, right? That's what the forum's all about. The challenge is that things like the employee handbook are like the least sexy thing on your to-do list. Like, nobody wants to sit down and actually carve out this. Like, how many pages is ours? I don't know, it's like 112 pages or so. No, 45 pages. Sorry, I exaggerated. It's 45 pages. Still, that's a lot of copy, right? I know I don't want to write that. But the point is that you know that you need an employee handbook when you find yourself as an employer, answering the same questions or concerns over and over and over. And if you find yourself being really frustrated by some really basic questions like, hey, when's the last day of school? When's my last teaching day? Right? Or something more deep like, I didn't know I was only allowed to miss like 3 days a year of teaching. How was I supposed to know that? Right? Well, that's a unique policy at BMF. We have like a 2-day, 2 of any weekday a year you can miss. So how are they supposed to know that? Well, it's all in an employee handbook. So if you find yourself answering these questions over and over and over and over again, well, then it's time to start putting pen to paper. And as you put it so well, Daniel, it's time to start anticipating that you're going to get that question again. Yes. And you could either take the time to face-to-face answer the question over and over, or, as you're so good at doing, Daniel, take the time to get either yourself or somebody else to sit down and write down the answer. And then in your Slack channel or in an email or however you communicate, simply point to the answer and be like, take a look. Here's where you can find the answer to that question, and so many more. So that the basic why behind it is, Daniel, is it's exhausting to have to always point to, to have to always answer rather than point. Right? It's just exhausting. Like none of us want to do that.
Would you say that and actually, before I even ask this, I do just want to say this is not a fluffy episode. This isn't like a philosophical episode. We're actually going to get into things that are in the handbook here in a few minutes, but I do want to set the table with just a few questions first. But would you say that a good description for what the employee handbook is for you is kind of like an FAQ for the employees of your business?
I was just thinking that. It's like right now we're like you mentioned big music games. We have lots of schools that are joining every single week and want to start gaming. Well, as an organization, we're in our growing pains. We're figuring out what all the questions are from all these amazing teachers and school owners. And so we're literally creating our FAQ docs every week as we get new questions, right?
Yeah.
It's a young upstart company that's super energized around what we're doing. But do we have like a really deep FAQ yet for that? No, it's growing, right?
Yeah.
So it's a perfect way to put it. Um, and you said you want to set the table. Well, let me set the table of contents for what's in our employee handbook. Can we just go there and just like kind of dig in a little bit?
Right before we do that, there was one other preliminary question I want to ask. Is there any legal weight
Yeah.
to the employee handbook? And the other was, when do you first introduce the
Mm.
employee handbook to your team members? And then I want to get into what's actually inside of it.
Those are two really good questions. I'm going to answer the second one first because that leads to the first one, the legal weight question. So when a new teacher or a new staff member joins us, they have an onboarding process, right?
Yes.
They've gone through our hiring funnel. They're an amazing purpose and values fit. They've got great skills that we admire and we want to be part of our team. And so the very first thing that happens is they actually have a sit down with Jessica, like a 30-minute Zoom, and they literally read through the employee handbook together.
Wow.
And essentially, Jessica's like, is this understood? Is this understood? Is this understood? And I think she even goes as far as to have them sort of initial it, like section by section. And she doesn't, since it's 45 pages, obviously you can't read 45 pages in 30 minutes. So what she's doing is she's saying this section outlines this idea or policy. This is the purpose of this section. And then at the end, she says, by the way, it's always available for you to review in Gusto. Gusto is like our JustWorks version. It's where we handle all employee paperwork. It's where the contracts live. It's where they can see their payroll pay stub. It's where Leah, our bookkeeper accountant works and runs payroll through Gusto. So it's always there for them. By the way, in that tool, they log in themselves and sign all the documents. They sign their contract, they sign the employee handbook, etc. So when is it introduced? It's introduced right at the beginning, ideally before they ever even do a day of work at the factory. Right? So the goal is to have them see this and know that there's that FAQ, as you put it so well. There's an FAQ for them. If they have any questions about anything from schedule to taking time off to finding a sub to whatever, it's there. Dig it? Now,
Mm.
the second piece is, does it have any legal weight? Okay, so here's the deal. In your people power, as your growing team, as your school gets larger and larger, you get to your second or third growth stage, you have 4 or 5 teachers, you might have that general manager eventually, you'll have that admin person. As they grow, I'm going to assume that you're going to eventually have like a W-2 employee, right? They're not all going to be 1099 contractors because there are different legal implications if everybody's a contractor, right? But let's assume there's 1 or 2 on there. Here's the deal: is your job as CEO or founder is to build team, and that team will change over time. There are going to be moments in the growth of your school, they may have already happened, where you have to unhire someone, better known as firing someone. There's someone it's not working out, right?
Right.
So that employee handbook is essential for when, and it's the worst part of the gig, right? Unhiring someone just sucks. I've never met anybody who's like, I love that part of being the founder or whatever, It's like nobody likes doing that. But if you have your ducks in a row from a paperwork standpoint, then it becomes much more systemized and actually you can handle it, right? So the employee handbook's essential because anytime, let's say, a teacher misses a recital, misses a day, shows up late, communicates it with you in a way that's not appropriate in your school, you grab a screenshot and you put it in their file. Why? Because you're going to point to that employee handbook and say, well, this employee, when we let them go, always had access to the policies that we all agreed to at this school. And here are 3 or 4 or 5 examples of how they didn't follow the policy, right? The reason why you need those is because if that person, for any reason, decides to come back and fight it or apply for unemployment or do these things that will have an impact on your company, you need to be able to point to that and say, look, we had all these things in place, and the Department of Labor or whomever you're talking with that needs that information will say, yeah, clearly you guys have a case. You have everything in place here. And so this is a non-issue, and depending on what the channel is. So that's taking it really heavy all of a sudden, Daniel. But the truth is that you never want that to happen, but you always want to be prepared in case it does, which gets right back to your opening comment, which is that we don't know all the things we're supposed to anticipate as owners. And that's the benefit of something like our podcast or having a community of people that you can talk to all the time and say, hey, tell me what I should anticipate next. But to your point, that's actually our job, is to become better anticipators.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I could go on and on about that. I won't.
This episode is sponsored by BigMusicGames.com. As our listeners know, Brooklyn Music Factory is all about a fun, fluency-first approach to music lessons. And at the foundation of our teaching methods are rhythm, melody, harmony, and songwriting games that challenge students as young as 4 years old to train their ears and flex that musical mind. Because when you set an intention of gamifying every single lesson, you're going to find improved attendance, increased play at home, and higher student retention. So we've set up a website just for our listeners so you can start playing today. Go to bigmusicgames.com/7FMS and create your free account. Again, that's bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And if you join today, I'm going to send you a personal invite to join our weekly teacher training call with me and Greggy Bizzle, our chief game designer. Go ahead and put play back into practice with Big Music Games.
So last micro question before we get into what's inside, and I even have a qualification about what I want to talk about what's inside. Did you have an attorney review your employee handbook? Do you have them review it as you add things? Do you actually have them review the copy you put in your employee handbook?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer to it because I'm not in charge of revising the employee handbook at this stage of the company. Jessica does that. She revises it every single year. She sends it to us. I'm going to guess that we started with an employee handbook template that came from like a legal Zoom, something like that.
Yeah,
that's what I'm just going to call it like it is. I wish I could say BMF's own attorney reviews it every year. That doesn't happen. Not right now. Right, So we probably started with a rock solid template, and then we sort of used our own language, etc.
Okay, that's good. So right now, you could go to Google and you could Google what should be in an employee handbook. You could go to ChatGPT and ask, Mr. Robot, what should be in an employee handbook? And they're going to give you a lot of things. Like 90% of it's probably going to be the same. Nate, what I'm really interested in zooming in on as we talk about, give it like an aerial view of what this is what things have you all uniquely put in there? Or what's the checklist of things that you think our audience should have in their employee or team member handbook that are maybe unique to our industry? Because just rattling some things off, your employee handbook should, have probably a company history. It should have like the typical legal stuff that we're equal opportunity employers. It probably will define what it means to be full-time, part-time, temporary, a contractor. It'll have like a code of conduct for the workplace, attendance and punctuality, anti-harassment, non-discrimination, confident. Like there's some boilerplate stuff. Like, what do you think are things that are unique to BMF or to the music school, music studio industry?
Yeah. I'm going to actually read you the table of contents and then
Love
highlight
it.
2 or 3 unique pieces. Okay. That's okay. So our table of contents is straightforward. First is just general policy information. Second section is employment information. Third section is company property. Fourth section is employee conduct. And then the final one is employee benefits, leave, and additional information. So let me then go in and highlight a few things. When we go to general policy information, what's fascinating is the very first thing that we cover is our purpose. And you hear me talk about this, the purpose and values. We just hammer this all the time because that is unique to BMF that we put that in right out of the gate.
Yep.
We talk about exactly why you're here as an employee, because this is the purpose of this company, right? I'm not going to read it out loud, but that's what we open with. We even have another section right under purpose that outlines exactly how we do it. It's like fun, big music games, game-based learning, songwriting, technique, following a unique BMF curriculum, and building community. In bullets with a one-sentence explanation right out of the gate. We haven't even gotten into the dry stuff, right? But the next thing that's in there is it tells you exactly the last time it was updated. So there's just a little, I'm getting in the weeds here, but this is important. If there have been changes in the policy, you put a date there, effective date, revision date. So when we go in, and we do this every year, Jessica reviews the whole employee handbook, then sends it to the leadership team and says, is there anything else that's important to you that you want to review here? Okay, moving on. You asked for things that are unique to BMF. Nothing is unique around sort of like what it is to be an employee. Let's see here, full-time salary, and all those things are there. Now we get to performance evaluations. This is unique to BMF. Okay, so performance evaluations is when we get into this idea of our big 3, like exactly the 3 ways that every faculty member is going to be measured, right, in their success. And then we essentially say, keep in mind that we are a company that measures your success and we give promotions and we give raises, your benefits improve based on performance. This is really, really an important piece for you as a school owner to contemplate. Like, how do you measure success with your employees? Start with the easy ones, your teachers, right? You can put something in there and that say, basically, we expect retention of your students year to year, spring to fall, to be, whatever percentage, average percentage or greater. That kind of thing you can actually put in the employee handbook. So right out of the gate, everybody's on the same page. Hey, we're not just assuming everything's awesome and you just go do what you want behind closed doors. No, as a community, we have this expectation that we're all striving for the same thing, right? So moving on, we mentioned right out of the gate here that we in fact do have a personal file for every single employee. It's just a G Drive folder. Let's just be honest, right? That's all it is, with screenshots or concerns about communications back and forth, or if there's issues, a director of the department might say, hey, this person was 2 hours late to the gig, or this person left early and I want it to go on the record, that kind of thing. That's what's there, but we put it in the employee handbook. And when you say, actually, Daniel, I'm going to ping it back to you for thoughts before I go to a couple of other unique parts of ours that are music school focused, because I think this is really important. I think as music school owners, since every one of us, and we talked about this a couple eps ago, every one of us started as solopreneurs, single teacher studios, right? So who did we need to hold accountable? Ourselves. Sometimes we're good at it, sometimes we're bad, right? But the minute we become an employer, we bring on our first teacher. Doesn't matter if it's our friend, family member or someone that we went to school with. The minute we start to bring on people and say we're going to be accountable to all these people, then we actually need to write down what matters. And I think music school owners tend to be have a difficult time with this stage of growth because they sort of assume everyone who teaches must be just like them when they were a solopreneur with a single teacher studio. You know what I mean? Like we sort of assume everybody must have the same level of investment and engagement and understanding. And so as a result, we might be like a little presumptive and kind of think that other things are much more important than actually writing down like what we have here, which is that employee personal files maintained by Brooklyn Music Factory include, but are not limited to the following: your job application, resume, training documentation, salary history, disciplinary reports, warnings, and other records, performance evaluation documentation, your big three results, and annual employee contact information updates. That last one, whatever, mundane. But the point is that we actually let them know at the outset, hey, we track all these things for everybody, right? We're all playing on the same level playing field. Daniel, questions, comments, concerns, or jokes before I go on to a couple of other unique examples?
Yeah, I just want to point out some things you said there. Because you reference so many different topics as when you are talking about what is in the actual guide, and it just reminds me a number of episodes that we've done. Our episode on what percentage of pay that teachers should keep, that's episode 49. Our episode around how to give a good performance review, that's episode 101. Like all these little things that we've talked about in past episodes are kind of referenced here. And just as you went and were like checklisting off all the things that this covers, I'm thinking, oh, we talked about in this, we talked about that and that. And here's the deal. I don't think I want to crowd the show notes with 18 different episodes of like all these different points you touched on. I will just say that we have made an episode guide that's divided by category. And all you have to do is go to growyourmusicstudio.com/7FMS, 7FMS, and the episode guide is linked to on that page. You can just click the button and you can look at the guide. Again, this is all free. There's no offer here. Like it's literally just us categorizing all the episodes we've done in the past by category, so that if you have an area of focus in your business right now, you can look at all the different episodes that we've given on that particular topic. Maybe just speed run through the list of episodes, and you'll just be so much more equipped to work in that area. So yeah, that's, I think, the only thing I want to say around that, Nate. But I think you just said that you had some other things you wanted to drop in here as well. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that's unique, it's not unique to music schools, but the reality is we use a lot of equipment in music schools. There's instruments, there's everything from like picks to dry erase markers to instruments to cables. There's lots of stuff in our schools, right? And so this midsection where we talk about property, basically what it means. And one of the things that's really important in your employee handbook is to just state simply like, hey, all of this stuff lives under the roof of this entity, which is this music school, Brooklyn Music Factory. So respect the gear. Obviously, don't take the gear. If you want to borrow equipment, you always have to ask, right? It's like, it seems sort of obvious, but when you write it down, you'll like, I'll read some things like Brooklyn Music Factory's facilities and studios, curriculum, equipment, and materials are not to be used for purposes related to outside employment without prior approval from your director or the director of families and communication. That's the J team, Jessica. Use of Brooklyn Music Factory intellectual property, like our big music games, all of our songwriters journey curriculum, mini keys, jam band 101. These are all curriculums that tons of teachers outside of BMF license to use. So we're just sort of stating the obvious, like, hey, we'd love for you to use this in other contexts, but you need to ask. Or like we have a great, a really beautiful story of a couple teachers that were at Brooklyn Music Factory for like half a year, half a decade, 5, 6, 7 years. And now they're starting their own schools. And it's amazing because they helped develop this curriculum and now they're licensing the curriculum, right? In their own in Colorado. Hopefully that's going to be happening soon. And then also upstate New York. And so in the handbook, Daniel, it's like you're just sort of stating what seems obvious to all of us, but we didn't initially have that in there. We didn't actually mention curriculum because we didn't think we needed to until
Right.
actually we had a couple of times where people were using it, teaching like another school they were working at. And we were like, hold on a sec, this is actually unique. This is a really special opportunity and resource for you when you're under this roof.
Right.
So, I think that, again, not every school listening to us develops their own curriculum, et cetera, but every school listening to us absolutely has equipment and that kind of thing that could walk if they don't sort of state the obvious.
Yeah, and that's addressed in your company property section. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, totally. I'm
Yeah.
going to get into a couple of other pieces that I think are really important in your employee manual, which is that the schedule, which seems so sort of mundane and obvious, is probably one of the greatest pain points for managers and owners of schools. Teachers, staff, actually constantly peppering you with when's the next recital, when is the last day of school, are we open, are we closed, etc. Right? This sounds so simple and mundane because it is simple. Every year, Jessica writes an entire calendar for the next year, right? She waits until the public school calendar comes out, which happens sort of like February or March. She creates a calendar for the next school year then. And then it's called internal calendar for internal eyes only. She shares it with the director. She says, is there anything I'm missing here? She gives us about a month to respond. And then after that, but she inks it into the employee handbook and then she makes it public. She's like, in the employee handbook, the new updated calendar. Whenever you have a question about what to do, where to do it, when to do it, etc., it's always there for you. And so I'm just going to put that out there. Is it unique to music schools? Not really. But the truth is, music schools have lots of events, tons of events, right? Tons of recitals. And it's just kind of like essential that you have that in there. Again, is it sexy? No, but it's essential.
This episode is sponsored by grouplessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from grouplessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks. I love that. I think as we go into the close here, I would have maybe like a couple questions left. When do you think it's appropriate, or maybe you already addressed this, when do you think it's appropriate for people who are listening to actually have an employee handbook? Because I think the obvious answer on the surface is, oh, well, as soon as you have your first employee, but that might not be the most, that might not be the answer you come up with. What do you think, Nate? Or is it that simple?
Yeah, no, I know. I think the key here is, and we work with a lot of different school owners, Daniel, as you mentioned before, And sometimes there are rich, deep topics that will take months to work through, systems that will take quite a while to develop, and you need to go through seasons or semesters of practicing that system to get it right. I don't believe this is one of those things. I believe this is one of those opportunities where you literally Google employee handbook template and you say, you know what? Starting, next fall, I'm going to have an employee handbook and I'm going to just give myself 3 months to chip away at this thing. If it looks weird and I don't understand it, I'm going to delete it for draft one, right? I'm just going to include the most basic things and I'm going to knock it out. I don't think this is an overthink, deep, rich topic. I think this is hey, we have a makeup lesson policy, we have a cancellation policy, we have a show up on time policy, we have a blackout, you can't take time off during recital weeks policy, and we have a school calendar. Okay, I'm going to put all those in draft one of the employee manual, right? Some of the legal things, obviously you're going to leave in there. We're an equal opportunity employer, these things that are just cookie cutter, right?
Right, yes.
But that's my answer. It's like, don't overthink this one.
Yeah.
And if you're the kind of person to totally, like, I'm not the person who would have just been like, I'm definitely going to write this up. Jessica was the one who made our first draft, right? And that was like 5 years into the company or something. I think we were 4 or 5 years into BMF. So we've had this employee manual for maybe a decade now.
Yeah.
But she was really well suited to do it. She's not afraid of words. She's like happy to go in there and edit it.
Sure.
So there's probably someone on your team or even a family member who could be like, would you mind helping me? Let's just knock this out together. I'll be the one who dictates what the policy should be. Will you be the one who helps me do the copy edit?
Yeah, I think is my last kind of thought for the episode is I want to address the emotional angle of all this, because just in all the coaching I do of school owners, I know this could feel like, oh, yet another thing I have to put on my task list. And I think that
totally
you have an option. You can do the good enough version now, where you get the LegalZoom thing or you get the template, you leave all the boilerplate stuff in there like Nate was just talking about. You add a few things in that you talk about, you just off the top of your head, you add a few things in. You're like, I'm constantly asking this question or answering this question. They're constantly asking this question. And then it's done. And then you release it. And instead of it being like an emotional burden on you for the next year while you wrangle your hands up, wring your hands over it and like feel yucky and like eventually begin to resent it because the task list never gets done, knock it out on a Saturday afternoon. I've said this in the podcast before. I went most of my adult life with not doing even some of the most basic financial fluency stuff that Nate geeks out about all the time. Like that, It wasn't as if it wasn't an area of strength. It's just I didn't even know I was supposed to be doing it. Like, oh, that's for like a big company, And so literally a Saturday, so like a mentor like kind of criticized in a nice way that I wasn't doing such and such things. Like, wait, you don't have that? I was like, oh, am I supposed to? I didn't think it was that big a deal, He's like, no, you need to do that. And I literally went on a website about how a company runs basic financial information. And I spent a Saturday afternoon, just only a couple hours, reading through how to build an income statement. I built my first one. I found out like a half year later that I was doing something like majorly wrong in it and miscategorizing things. But the truth is that when another mentor pointed that out, like I had gotten so used to doing this on a monthly basis that I could very quickly adjust the mistake that I had made. And it didn't hurt me, but it's like I had to start somewhere. So the quick and dirty version is always better than like thinking, oh, I've got to deeply educate myself about how to build an employee handbook or how to, build my first income statement or track marketing metrics in my school. No, you do the fast thing. And then if you're an organized person, and then I'll shut up. If you're an organized person, this is already coming into a system where you know what your priorities are and you can triage and decide if this is something you need to do right now or 6 months down the road.
Yes. And, dude, it's like I was just talking with a friend yesterday about Stephen King, his book on writing. And he's he's a great example of someone who shows up every day and has for decades of his career. Needless to say, he's churned out dozens of books, some of
Prolific.
which are classics. He's prolific. But what he doesn't do is question whether or not he should show up and knock it out.
Mm.
He always shows up. He writes for, I think it's like 4 hours, done. Or maybe it's a certain number of words, but he shows up and he writes. And it's much easier, to your point, to revise. Like I was just looking at our employee handbook. We have a whole addendum there where we've added, as the laws have changed in New York State, we've added an addendum. By the way, now you have to do sexual harassment training. That started like 2 years ago. So you got to go through this. Takes 45 minutes. Here's the link to it. We pay you to do it. That's an addendum on there, right? So it's way easier, Daniel, like you said, it's way easier to get a draft one. You're way more likely to continue to develop it if you're starting from something than starting from nothing. So get that draft one done, knock it out, share it. Believe me, you're going to do revisions every year for the remainder of your interest in owning a company.